Why do some people break free from cycles of poverty while others remain trapped? JD Vance might have the perfect answer in his book Hillbilly Elegy as he shares his powerful story of growing up in a struggling Rust Belt town, surrounded by family turmoil, addiction, and economic decline. Against all odds, he finds a way out, discovering lessons about culture, resilience, and the complexities of the American dream. But what exactly did he learn? JD Vance's story begins in a small, close-knit town where family and hard work were the pillars of daily life. His grandparents, known endearingly as Mama and Papa, were part of a wave of people who left the hills of Kentucky for towns like Middletown, Ohio. They sought steady jobs and a shot at a middle-class life, and the local factories offered just that. Papa landed a job at Armco, a steel company that gave families like theirs hope and stability. With good wages and a sense of community, they managed to build a life that many would call the American dream. But life for Hill people wasn't just about jobs, it was about culture. They were proud, fiercely loyal to their roots, and never backed down from a challenge. They brought traditions from the Appalachian Mountains and formed strong bonds with neighbors who shared their background. Yet over time, the towns that had once promised prosperity began to struggle. Factories like Armco started winding down and jobs dried up. This change hit hard. It left places like Middletown uncertain. Families searched for ways to hold on to their lives. For families like JD Vance's, factory jobs weren't just a paycheck. They represented a sense of pride and stability. Because, well, the local steel company, Armco, was more than an employer. It was a lifeline. For decades, it kept towns afloat, providing jobs and anchoring the community. Families could afford their homes, support their children, and build a life they were proud of. But then things began to shift. Factories in the region began closing. They moved operations overseas for cheaper labor. Jobs that had once been abundant vanished, and with them, the prosperity that families had come to rely on. For many in towns like Middletown, this wasn't just about losing an income, it was a blow to their way of life. Houses lost value, businesses shuttered, and the neighborhoods that were once bustling with life grew quieter and more run down. People who had spent their entire lives working now found themselves trapped with nowhere to go. Many had invested everything in their homes and businesses. When the market collapsed, they were left with only debt and uncertainty. Schools fell into disrepair, leaving kids with fewer opportunities to escape the cycle of poverty. Health problems surged too, as families found it harder to afford basic care. It was a harsh reality. Hard work no longer guaranteed success. The American dream felt like a distant memory to those who had built their lives around it. In this landscape, JD grew up watching his community unravel while trying to find his own path forward. But it wasn't just him that experienced the tumultuous life. His mother, Bev, had grown up in a tumultuous environment herself. The fights, the shouting, and the fear became a part of life for her and, eventually, for JD. Her father's drinking spiraled out of control, leading to nights filled with anger and violence. JD heard the stories about how his grandmother, Mama, once threatened to set Papa on fire if he came home drunk again. This was the environment that shaped his mother's childhood and set the stage for the challenges he would face. As a boy, he witnessed a revolving door of father figures. His mother struggled with relationships and addiction, which meant that JD was often caught in the whirlwind of her troubles. His family moved frequently, searching for a sense of normalcy that never seemed to stick. Some days they lived in a relatively calm household, with Bev working as a nurse and pushing him to succeed in school. Then, in a flash, things would turn upside down. There were explosive fights and attempts to cope with deep pain. At times, his mother's unpredictable behavior was frightening. This instability took a toll on him, especially during his early years. As the family bounced from one living situation to another, he felt the weight of their circumstances. He watched his mother struggle with addiction and mental illness. At times, she became so overwhelmed that she lashed out dangerously. During one terrifying drive, in a burst of anger, Bev threatened to crash the car, forcing JD to beg for their safety. That was the reality of growing up in a household that seemed always on the brink. Despite these struggles, he had moments of hope, often thanks to his grandparents, Mama and Papa. Their tough love and occasional intervention gave him glimpses of what stability could look like. Yet the family's turmoil was never far away, casting a shadow over his childhood. He learned to navigate a world where the line between calm and chaos could blur in an instant. It was a harsh lesson in resilience, one that would shape his understanding of the challenges facing families like his across the country. Through all the chaos of his childhood, there was one steady force that kept him grounded: his grandmother, Mama. She was tough, fiercely protective, and determined to steer JD onto the right path. When his mother's life spiraled out of control, Mama stepped in, taking him into her home and setting strict rules that shaped his teenage years. This wasn't just another move for him, it was the start of something different. It was the beginning of stability. Mama had a few simple rules: keep your grades up, get a job, and always help out around the house. These rules weren't negotiable. They became the structure he needed and had been missing for so long. Every day he came home to a place where someone cared about his future, even if it meant enforcing discipline in ways that sometimes felt harsh. She bought him a graphing calculator for advanced math classes. It was an expensive gesture that showed how much she valued his education. It was a lesson in responsibility and commitment to his own success. Her tough love wasn't just about setting rule, it was about giving JD a glimpse of what life could be if he worked hard. In Mama's house, he felt like he had a real shot at building a better life. He watched how she managed the household with a sense of pride and determination that rubbed off on him. She didn't sugarcoat things, and she didn't make excuses for the world around them. She pushed him to see beyond the limitations of their circumstances and to take ownership of his future. Those years with Mama were a turning point. His grades improved, his sense of self-worth grew, and for the first time, he began to dream of a life that looked different from the one he had known. Living with her wasn't always easy, but it was what he needed to start breaking the cycle of instability. Mama taught him more than just life skills. She taught him hope and perseverance. Her lessons gave him a foundation to face the challenges ahead. By the time he finished high school, he was at a crossroads. College seemed like a risky step, full of uncertainty and freedom that he wasn't sure how to handle. So he chose a different path: the Marines. It was the structure and discipline he needed, and it transformed him in ways he hadn't expected. The military became his crash course in adulthood. He learned how to be responsible, not just for himself, but for others as well. Early on, the Marines drilled into him the importance of self-discipline, physical fitness, and financial management. They taught him how to balance a checkbook, save for the future, and even how to invest. These were things he had never been exposed to growing up, and now they were becoming second nature. The experience gave him confidence and a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt before. But the lessons weren't just about routines and discipline. He learned what real leadership looked like. It wasn't about shouting orders or demanding respect. It was about earning trust through those actions, listening, and setting the right example. This was a new way of thinking for him, different from what he had seen in his own upbringing, and it changed how he viewed himself and his capabilities. When his time in the Marines ended, he was ready for the next step. He enrolled at Ohio State University, feeling a level of confidence that had been missing during his teenage years. College wasn't easy, but he now had the skills and mindset to tackle the challenges head on. He excelled in his classes and graduated with a double major in just 2 years. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming, and for the first time, he truly believed that a different future was possible. With that newfound belief, JD set his sights on Yale Law School. It was a leap that he never could have imagined before the Marines. Yale was a whole new world, full of people who came from backgrounds very different from his own. He felt out of place at times, but the lessons from the military carried him through. He knew how to work hard, how to handle setbacks, and most importantly, how to navigate environments that felt foreign to him. Yale was more than a school. It was the final step in changing how he saw his place in the world. It shaped his journey from a troubled past to a promising future. He was now stepping into an elite world where social connections and networks were just as important as academic performance. For someone who grew up in a place where connections were built on family loyalty and neighborhood ties, this new environment was different. At Yale, relationships meant something else entirely. It wasn't just about knowing people, it was about knowing the right people. Many of his classmates came from well-connected families, where job offers and internships seemed to come through a simple conversation or an email from a family friend. This was the kind of social capital that opened doors and created opportunities that he had never seen before. For him, the idea of social capital was foreign. Growing up in Middletown, success was tied to hard work and determination. No one talked about networking or making the right connections to get ahead. However, at Yale, it became clear that knowing how to navigate these social circles was just as important as earning good grades. His classmates knew this world inside and out. They had grown up in it. They didn't need to submit job applications to land interviews. Instead, they could simply reach out to someone they knew, a friend of the family, or a former colleague, and get their foot in the door. This was a completely new reality for JD, who was used to figuring things out on his own. In this new world, he quickly realized that success would require more than just academic excellence. He needed to build connections of his own. One of his biggest breakthroughs came when a professor saw something in him and pushed his application for a prestigious clerkship with a powerful federal judge. This was social capital in action. It wasn't just about who you were, it was about who was willing to vouch for you. And for the first time, he had someone influential in his corner. He also met a friend and built a relationship with her, Usha, a fellow law student. Their relationship became a turning point. Usha came from a different background, one that was more familiar with the world of privilege and networking. Her support helped him feel more confident in navigating this unfamiliar territory. With her by his side, he started to understand how to use the system to his advantage, how to lean on others when needed, and how to open doors that had once seemed closed. After he graduated from Yale and stepped into his career, he knew he had beaten the odds. Not just because he had worked hard, but because he had learned the value of social capital, the importance of mentorship, and the power of relationships. He had come from a family struggling to hold on to hope in a declining town, but he had made it to one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. His journey was far from typical, but it was proof of what could happen when resilience meets opportunity. And as JD would come to realize, he hadn't just escaped his past, he had redefined his future, one built on the strength of his roots and the power of the connections he had forged. Growing up poor set him up for failure, but he overcame all the odds to become tremendously successful. What do you think about his journey? Do you think that JD Vance and his story can change how people view the challenges they're facing? Share your thoughts in the comments below and be sure to subscribe.